Hello, and welcome to the Santee Church of Christ Bible Study Review, where we look over the last class that we had Sunday morning at Santee Church of Christ. We are finishing the book of Deuteronomy. We will cover chapters 33 and 34. Now, if you remember in chapter 32, Moses issued a song, which is basically a warning and a prophecy concerning Israel when they fall away from God and enter into idolatry. But to end this book, God's not going to leave or have Moses leave on that sort of negative note. He's actually going to say some very beautiful things in this section. It's very poetic. It's like its own song. The opening part of chapter 33 essentially makes the statement, this is the blessing which Moses, the man of God, blessed the sons of Israel before his death. And it makes some wonderful statements about him. He said Jehovah came from Sinai and from these other places with his holy ones. The holy ones here, I think, is Israel. Also known as saints. Some people call them angels. You know, there's so many different interpretations of this, but the context seems to be complimenting Israel at this time. Moses, in verse 4, Moses commanded a law to us, an inheritance, the congregation of Jacob, and he was king in Jeshurun. Now, I read that to mean that Moses was the king. Some versions read that God was made the king. Either way, God being the king is absolutely correct. But in this rendering, it really does look like the context is calling Moses the king. When the people got together, he was their leader. That's all that means, in my own mind. Then in the next section, Moses goes to compliment Israel through blessing, saying he gives a blessing for each tribe. And it's very poetic. And it just basically is saying that they're going to be prosperous, they're going to live in safety, and Levi and Joseph get the longest of the blessing pronouncements of this. It doesn't mean anything. It's just that Moses had more to say about them than anybody else. But it's interesting that Simeon is not included in this dissertation, and there's some discussion about why that was. More than likely, when you look back in Numbers, and so their numbers are greatly diminished, and then by the time you get to Joshua, I think it's Joshua 19, we find that they're basically assimilated into the territory with Judah. And so that is likely the reason for it. There are other reasons given that I read about, going all the way back to Genesis, when they massacred the people of Shechem because of the thing that happened with Dinah, and that's another story altogether. That might be it. It's kind of hard to say, but the most immediate problem was what happened in the book of Numbers, and their numbers just simply diminished. So his final words in the blessings is God is a refuge, and he's basically going to protect you. Israel will live in safety. Blessed are you, O Israel. Who is like you? A people saved by Jehovah. So Moses is making these final statements to tell them, look how special God is making you. He's trying to reiterate the level of seriousness of what's going on at the moment. This is a historical moment. He wants them to make sure they understand the gravity of all of this. Then in chapter 34, we see Moses die, and it is a very intimate view of his death. And not only that, but there's an intimacy between God and Moses, and it's spoken of in here that really there had never been anybody like this, with Moses, this relationship with God had never been before or after. And of course, we know with when the Christ comes, he changes that. The Christ association is God, and so that association brings it even closer. Moses was simply a foreshadowing of what was to come. He goes up to the plains of Moab. God tells him to go to Mount Nebo, and it says, "This is the land which I've sworn to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, saying, I will give it to your seed," which Moses has repeated over and over. "I have caused you to see with your eyes, but you shall not cross over." So Moses sees the land from Mount Nebo. And the Moses servant Jehovah died there according to the command of Jehovah, and he buried him in a valley in the land of Moab. So it's interesting to see that God takes care of these very human sort of details with the burial of Moses, and because of that, we see that, wow, this is highly unusual, and it intimates that God had a very special relationship with Moses, and we, who can deny that? Just look at the saga that Moses has been through throughout his life. And I would say that if there's anything to learn from the book of Deuteronomy and all of the saga of Israel and during this time, it's that even though they thought they had faith in God, they were calling out to God to come rescue them and deliver them. And God listened to them. But when it came down to doing what he wanted them to do, they weren't willing to do it. And so many of them fell in the desert. And that's probably the bigger message for all of us, that we might say we have faith, but if we are not practicing that faith, if we are not simply doing good deeds, which is really the hallmark and the foundation of Christianity, that we are not exhibiting faith. And that is what God requires. He requires work, whether we want to admit it or not. If we are not doing good for God, then we don't have faith. And that is the only way we can exhibit our faith, is through our good works. Thank you so much for listening. We are going to begin the next Sunday. We're going to begin a new study Sunday mornings at the Santee Church at 9 o'clock in the book of Joshua, which makes sense. Thank you, and may God bless you.